The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, transmitted across every communication channel the Terran Federation possessed. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of Luna Station, watching the holographic display as alien symbols transformed into human text. The translation software worked for several minutes before the final message appeared on the main screen. Around her, the communication staff fell silent. Coffee cups stopped moving halfway to lips. Keyboards went quiet. Even the constant hum of the station's life support system seemed to pause as everyone absorbed what they were reading. Greetings to the species known as humans, the message began. We are the hegemony of elder races, the rightful rulers of this galaxy for over 10,000 years. Your rapid expansion and resource consumption has been noted and evaluated by our collective wisdom. Chen read the words twice before their meaning truly sank in. She had commanded fleets for 30 years, fought pirates in the Outer Rim, and negotiated with hostile alien traders, but nothing had prepared her for this. After careful consideration, we have determined that your species represents an inefficient use of galactic resources. Your emotional nature, short lifespans, and chaotic social structures make you unsuitable for independent existence. Therefore, we offer you the following terms for your continued survival. The Admiral's hands clenched into fists as she continued reading. You will surrender 80% of your current population for relocation to labor facilities throughout hegemony space. These individuals will be well treated and provided with meaningful work befitting their capabilities. The remaining 20% will be relocated to designated worlds under hegemony supervision, where you may continue to exist as a client species. Chen looked around the command center. Every face showed the same expression of disbelief mixed with growing anger. Lieutenant Morrison, barely 25 years old, raised his hand like a student in class. "Admiral," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "did they just ask us to hand over 4 billion people?" "They did not ask, Lieutenant," Chen replied, her voice steady despite the fire building in her chest. "Keep reading." The message continued with cold mathematical precision. "Our projections indicate that human resistance will last approximately 6.7 standard galactic cycles before complete compliance is achieved. To minimize unnecessary suffering, we recommend immediate acceptance of these terms. You have 30 standard days to respond." The transmission ended with detailed coordinates for surrender locations throughout human space. No signature, no diplomatic pleasantries, just numbers and locations, as if humanity were cattle being prepared for transport. Chen dismissed the communications staff and sealed the command center. She needed time to think, to process what she had just read. The hegemony of elder races was not unknown to humanity. First contact had occurred 137 years ago, when human exploration ships encountered the outermost border stations of their territory. The elder races were exactly what their name suggested: ancient civilizations that had ruled the galaxy since before Earth had developed complex life. The crystalline Vorthak, whose cities were grown rather than built and who thought in geological time. The energy-based Zephyrians, who lived inside stars and considered planets mere curiosities. The hive-minded Calith, whose collective consciousness spanned thousands of worlds. For over a century, humanity had existed on the very edge of their awareness. Human colonies spread through unclaimed systems in what the elder races considered empty space. Trade was minimal, contact even less so. Most humans lived their entire lives without ever seeing an alien from the hegemony. Chen had always assumed this would continue. Humanity would slowly expand, maybe eventually earning a place at the galactic table through technological advancement or useful discoveries. She had never imagined this. Her personal communicator chimed. President Martinez was calling an emergency session of the Federation Council. Every military commander, colonial governor, and department head was being recalled to Earth immediately. Chen would need to take the next transport, leaving Luna Station under her second-in-command. The journey to Earth gave her time to read the intelligence reports that were flooding in from across human space. The message had been received simultaneously on every world, every station, every ship with a communication array. But more disturbing were the follow-up transmissions from human outposts near hegemony territory. Alien fleets were moving. Massive formations of ships unlike anything in human databases were taking position along the border between hegemony space and human colonies. The ships were beautiful in their way, elegant curves of crystal and energy that looked more like artwork than weapons of war. But sensors detected power signatures that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. Chen arrived at the Federation Council chambers in Geneva to find controlled chaos. Representatives from 200 worlds filled the Great Hall, their voices creating a constant background hum of conversation. She took her place among the military advisors and waited for President Martinez to call for order. "Ladies and gentlemen," the president began, his voice carrying across the chamber through speakers embedded in every seat. "We all know why we are here. The question before us is simple. How do we respond to the hegemony's ultimatum?" The debate that followed lasted 18 hours. Colonial representatives argued for negotiation, pointing out that humanity barely controlled 300 systems compared to the hegemony's tens of thousands. Military advisors presented simulation after simulation, showing human defeat in any direct conflict. Economists calculated the cost of war against an enemy with effectively unlimited resources. But gradually, a different voice began to emerge from the chaos. It started with Governor Walsh from New Dublin, who stood and spoke in simple terms that cut through all the complex analysis. "My granddaughter is 7 years old," he said. "She likes to paint pictures of flowers and asks me to read her stories before bed. Are we seriously discussing which bureaucrat gets to decide if she lives or dies?" Similar voices rose from across the chamber. The representative from New Tokyo talked about her son, who wanted to be a starship engineer. The delegate from Armstrong City spoke of his elderly parents, who had worked their entire lives to build a farm on a world that had once been barren rock. Chen found herself thinking of her own family. Her brother Marcus, who taught mathematics to children on Europa. Her sister Janet, who grew food in orbital greenhouses. Her nephew Tommy, who collected pictures of alien animals and dreamed of becoming a xenobiologist. The debate continued through the night, but Chen could see the mood shifting. The mathematical arguments for surrender grew quieter as personal stories grew louder. By dawn, the room had reached an unspoken consensus. President Martinez called for a formal vote as the sun rose over Lake Geneva. The resolution was simple. The Terran Federation rejects the terms offered by the hegemony of elder races and will defend the independence and freedom of all human beings by any means necessary. The vote was unanimous. Chen was tasked with composing the official response. She sat in her temporary quarters at Federation headquarters, staring at a blank screen for over an hour. "How do you tell ancient gods that you refuse to kneel? How do you declare war on civilizations that controlled the galaxy before your species learned to make fire?" In the end, she wrote exactly what she felt. "To the hegemony of elder races, we have received your ultimatum and given it the consideration it deserves. The Terran Federation respectfully declines your generous offer. We will not surrender our people. We will not abandon our worlds. We will not bow to any authority that views sentient beings as resources to be optimized. If you wish to test humanity's resolve, you are welcome to try." Admiral Sarah Chen, speaking for all humanity. She attached the message to a transmission that would reach every hegemony communication station simultaneously. No encryption, no hidden channels. She wanted every elder race to read it clearly. The response came 3 days later. Not words this time, but actions. Long-range sensors detected massive fleet movements throughout hegemony space. Ships that had guarded the same systems for centuries were moving toward human territory. The ancient war machine of the elder races was awakening. Chen returned to Luna Station to find her staff already preparing for war. Supply lines were being secured, colonial militias activated, and defensive positions fortified. But everyone knew the truth. Humanity's military was designed to fight pirates and settle colonial disputes, not wage war against galactic superpowers. The first hegemony ships appeared at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, exactly 1 week after Chen sent her response. They moved with the slow confidence of predators who had never known fear. Beautiful vessels of living crystal and contained starfire drifted through space like deadly art exhibitions. Chen watched them on her command screen and felt a strange calm settle over her. The talking was done. The politics were finished. Now came the part she understood, the application of violence in defense of everything she held dear. She opened a communication channel to every human ship in the system. Military vessels, merchant haulers, and civilian transports all received the same message. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. The enemy has arrived. They believe we will surrender after a few demonstrations of their power. They think we fight like they do, with rules and restraint and concern for minimizing casualties. They are about to learn otherwise. Execute Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was buried deep in Federation military doctrine, a contingency plan that most officers hoped never to see implemented.
It suspended all rules of engagement, all concerns for proportional response, all limitations on weapons use.
Protocol 7 meant that humanity was fighting for its survival, and survival meant that anything was permitted. The hegemony ships continued their slow approach, no doubt preparing some limited demonstration of power designed to encourage human surrender. They had fought this way for millennia, precise, controlled, efficient. Their wars were more like carefully choreographed negotiations backed by the threat of force. They had never fought humans before. Chen smiled as she watched their approach. It was not a pleasant expression. In 18 hours, the elder races would learn the difference between fighting a civilized species and fighting humans whose children were threatened. She hoped some of them would live long enough to warn the others. The hegemony fleet approached Kepler 442 with the same ceremonial precision their ancestors had used to conquer 1,000 worlds. Admiral Zethkar of the Vorthak commanded from his flagship, a crystalline dreadnought grown over 3 centuries in the deepest caverns of his homeworld. His bridge crew moved with the slow, deliberate motions of beings who measured time in geological epochs. "Status report," Zethkar requested, his voice resonating through the crystal matrices that served as his ship's communication system. "Human defensive positions identified," replied his tactical officer. 7 military vessels, various configurations, approximately 40 civilian ships in defensive formations around the inhabited worlds. They appear to be following standard protective protocols. Zethkar studied the tactical display with something approaching amusement. The human ships were positioning themselves between the hegemony fleet and the civilian population centers. It was exactly what military doctrine predicted. They would sacrifice their combat vessels in a futile gesture to protect non-combatants. "Begin demonstration sequence," he ordered. "Target the orbital defense platforms first. Use minimum force settings. We want them functional for our use once they surrender." The hegemony ships opened fire with weapons that had brought down empires. Beams of coherent energy, guided projectiles that could navigate through asteroid fields, and gravity manipulation devices that could crack moons, but all set to their lowest power levels, designed to disable rather than destroy. The human defense platforms died quickly, their primitive armor no match for even restrained hegemony weaponry. Zethkar watched the humans scramble to evacuate the platforms before they were destroyed, noting with approval that they were trying to minimize casualties. This was how civilized species behaved in war. "Human commander is requesting communication," his communications officer reported. "Put them through," Zethkar replied. Perhaps they were ready to surrender already. That would be efficient. The image that appeared on his display was not what he expected. Admiral Chen looked directly at him from her command chair, her expression calm and focused. There was no fear in her eyes, no desperation. If anything, she looked like a predator studying prey. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation," she said. "You are in violation of human territorial space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Zethkar was genuinely puzzled. Did she not understand the situation? His fleet could destroy every human ship in the system without taking damage. Perhaps humans were simply unable to comprehend the scale of the force arrayed against them. "Admiral Chen," he replied, his voice carrying the patient tone he might use with a child. "We do not wish unnecessary bloodshed. Surrender now and your people will be relocated safely. Continue to resist and we will be forced to demonstrate the futility of your position." Chen smiled. It was not a reassuring expression. "You know what?" she said. "I think you should demonstrate. We could use the educational experience." The communication ended. Zethkar stared at the blank screen for several moments, trying to understand what had just happened. In 10,000 years of hegemony expansion, no species had ever responded to overwhelming force with what appeared to be amusement. "Target the military vessels," he ordered. "Disable their weapons and engines. Perhaps seeing their fleet helpless will clarify their thinking." The hegemony ships moved into attack formation, their movements as graceful as a ballet. Each vessel had its assigned targets. Each weapon was calibrated for maximum psychological impact with minimum actual damage. This was warfare as art, precise and beautiful and utterly civilized. The human ships did not retreat. Instead, they accelerated directly toward the hegemony fleet, abandoning all defensive formations. Their weapons fired continuously as they charged, every missile and energy beam aimed not at military targets but at the largest hegemony vessels. Curious, Zethkar mused. They appeared to be attempting suicide attacks. How primitive. But as the human ships closed distance, something began to go wrong. The first human vessel to reach weapons range was a small destroyer, barely 100 meters long. It should have been destroyed instantly by the focused fire of 3 hegemony cruisers. Instead, it vanished. One moment it was there, charging through space with all weapons blazing. The next moment it simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris field, no energy signature. It was as if the ship had been edited out of reality. Tactical report, Zethkar demanded, unease creeping into his voice for the first time in centuries. Unknown, Admiral. Sensors show no trace of the vessel. It appears to have suffered complete molecular dissolution, but we detect no weapon signatures capable of producing such an effect. The second human ship reached attack range, a heavy cruiser that should have been crippled by their opening barrage. Instead of dying, it began to change. Its hull flowed like liquid, reforming into shapes that hurt to look at. Weapons emerged from impossible angles, firing projectiles that seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. What in the name of the ancients? Zethkar whispered. The reformed human ship struck his fleet's left flank. Where its weapons hit, hegemony vessels did not just take damage, they began to age. Millennia passed in seconds as perfect crystal hulls cracked and crumbled, as energy systems designed to last forever guttered and died. More human ships were reaching weapons range, and each one was wrong in a different way. One appeared to be phasing in and out of normal space, striking from angles that should not have existed. Another seemed to be broadcasting something that made his crew scream and cover their sensory organs. All ships withdraw to safe distance, Zethkar ordered, his composure finally cracking. We need time to analyze these weapon systems. But withdrawal proved impossible. The space around them had changed. What had been empty void now crawled with things that sensors insisted were not there. Navigation systems reported contradictory readings. Some areas of space seemed to have more or fewer than 3 dimensions. The human fleet, what was left of it, had formed a perfect sphere around the hegemony ships. They were no longer charging to their deaths. They were hunting. Admiral Chen's voice came over all communication channels simultaneously, even the encrypted military frequencies that should have been impossible for humans to access. You wanted a demonstration? She said, her voice eerily calm. Let me show you what happens when you threaten human children. What followed could not properly be called a battle. Battles implied some possibility of victory for both sides. This was an extermination event. The human ships moved through Zethkar's fleet like diseases through a healthy body. They did not simply destroy, they corrupted. Hegemony vessels that had served faithfully for centuries turned on each other, their crews screaming about visions of burning worlds and dying stars. Zethkar watched his flagship's sensors as reality broke down around them. His communications officer was weeping crystalline tears as he reported contact with ships that had been destroyed hours ago. His tactical officer claimed that some of the human vessels were attacking them from the past. Emergency transmission to Hegemony Command, Zethkar ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. Code Omega, repeat, Code Omega. Do not engage the humans. They are not what they appear to be. The last thing Admiral Zethkar saw before his ship died was Admiral Chen's face on his main display. She was smiling again, but now he could see what lay behind that expression. It was not cruelty or anger. It was the absolute, implacable certainty of a species that had looked into the abyss and decided to make the abyss blink first. Sleep well, she said gently, and when you meet your ancestors and whatever comes after, tell them that humans send their regards. The Vorthak flagship crumbled to dust, its crew experiencing every possible death simultaneously across multiple timelines. Around it, the last remnants of the Hegemony fleet suffered fates that would have been considered war crimes if anyone had been left alive to document them. When it was over, only one human ship remained. It hung in space where the Hegemony fleet had been, surrounded by debris that seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once. The ship's hull bore no scars, showed no signs of damage. It looked exactly as it had before the battle began. Admiral Chen sat in her command chair, reviewing the tactical reports that her crew had compiled. The battle had lasted exactly 14 minutes. 7 hegemony vessels had been completely destroyed. 2 had been converted into something else and sent back toward hegemony space with new instructions. 1 had been preserved as a message. "Communications," she said. "Open a channel to all hegemony worlds. Full spectrum broadcast." When the channel was established, she leaned forward slightly. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation. Your fleet has been destroyed. Your weapons have been analyzed and found inadequate. Your tactics have been reviewed and found obsolete. You came here believing you were fighting primitives. You were wrong." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You have 2 choices. You can escalate this conflict, in which case we will introduce you to concepts of warfare that will make today look like a peaceful disagreement. Or you can withdraw to your own territory and forget that humanity exists. Choose quickly. Our patience has limits." The transmission ended. Around her, the command crew worked quietly at their stations, filing reports and updating databases. No one spoke about what they had just witnessed. No one discussed the weapons that had been deployed or the technologies that had been revealed. They had crossed a line today, stepped into territory that no civilized species was supposed to enter. But Admiral Chen felt no regret. The elder races had threatened their children. They had demanded the surrender of human innocence. They had started this war believing humans would fight like rational beings. They were about to learn the difference between rational and human. In the depths of her ship, sealed behind barriers that existed in several dimensions simultaneously, something ancient stirred. Humanity had built their first truly lethal vessel. It would not be their last. The emergency session of the Hegemony Council convened in the crystal halls of Vorthak Prime, the ancient capital that had overseen galactic affairs for 10 millennia. Representatives from all 3 elder races gathered in the vast chamber where their ancestors had divided up the galaxy like a peaceful meal. High Counselor Bexathara of the Vorthak called the session to order, her crystalline form reflecting the light of 1,000 embedded data displays. Beside her, the energy projection of Zephyrian Archon Solaris flickered, with barely contained electromagnetic fury. The Calith delegation spoke with one voice through their primary consciousness node, a living brain the size of a small building that pulsed with the combined thoughts of trillion minds. "We have reviewed the transmissions from Admiral Zethkar's fleet," Bexathara began, her voice resonating through the crystal matrices that comprised the chamber walls. "The recordings are disturbing." That was an understatement. The battle footage from Kepler 442 had been classified at the highest levels, shown only to the Council and their most trusted military advisors. Several Vorthak observers had suffered permanent psychological damage from viewing the recordings. 2 Zephyrian energy forms had simply dispersed rather than continue to exist in a universe where such things were possible. The humans employed weapons that violate fundamental laws of physics, Archon Solaris reported, his energy form crackling with agitation. Temporal manipulation, dimensional folding, reality editing at the quantum level. Our analysis suggests they have access to technologies that predate our oldest civilizations. The Calith node pulsed slowly, as 1,000,000,000,000 minds processed the implications. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of collective wisdom gathered across dozens of worlds. "This analysis is incomplete," the collective stated. The weapons observed were not technological in the conventional sense. They appeared to be manifestations of pure intent, reality shaped by will rather than science. Such capabilities suggest the humans have achieved a state of existence that we do not understand. Bexathara studied the tactical displays that surrounded the chamber. 7 hegemony ships destroyed in 14 minutes, but the manner of their destruction was what truly concerned her. Ships did not simply cease to exist. Vessels built to last millennia did not age centuries in seconds. Crews trained for thousands of years did not break down screaming about impossible visions. "What are our options?" she asked. General Korthron, the Vorthak military commander, stepped forward. His form was more angular than the council members, shaped by centuries of warfare rather than contemplation. "We have mobilized the 2nd and 3rd battle fleets," he reported. 400 vessels total, including the newest dreadnoughts and planetary siege platforms. If we strike immediately, we can overwhelm them before they can deploy more of their exotic weapons. And if we cannot? Bexathara asked. Korthron hesitated. Then we activate the Omega protocols and sterilize their entire region of space. Better to lose a few systems than risk contamination spreading to core hegemony worlds. The Omega Protocols. Vexithara had hoped never to hear those words spoken aloud. Weapons designed by their ancestors during the galaxy's darkest age, when ancient evils had crawled up from the spaces between stars. Devices that could unmake entire solar systems, reducing matter itself to its component possibilities. Before she could respond, alerts began flashing throughout the chamber. New transmissions were being received from human space, broadcast on frequencies that reached every world in the galaxy. "Put it through," Vexithara ordered. Admiral Chen's image appeared in the center of the chamber, her human features alien and somehow predatory in the crystalline environment. She sat in what appeared to be a standard command chair, but something about the space around her seemed wrong. Reality looked thin there, as if it might tear open to reveal something vast and terrible. "To the Hegemony Council," Chen began, her voice carrying clearly despite the vast distance between them. "We have received your response to our previous demonstration. 300 more ships are moving toward our territory. This represents an escalation, and escalation requires a proportional response." She leaned forward slightly, and for a moment the chamber's sensors detected something impossible. Her image appeared to be looking directly at each council member, simultaneously. "You seem to believe this is still a conventional war that can be won through superior numbers and firepower. You are operating under a fundamental misunderstanding. This stopped being a conventional war the moment you threatened human children. We are no longer fighting to win territory or negotiate terms. We are fighting to ensure that the threat you represent can never threaten our families again." The transmission shifted, showing what appeared to be a shipyard unlike anything in hegemony databases. Massive vessels hung in construction frameworks that extended in directions that hurt to contemplate. The ships themselves were beautiful in a terrible way, their hulls reflecting stars that should not have been visible from that angle. 7 more vessels are complete," Chen continued. "Each one represents humanity's commitment to absolute war. They are named after our species' historical understanding of finality: Ragnarok, Kali, Apocalypse, Nemesis, Entropy, Void, and Ending. They are already moving toward your territory." The image focused on one ship in particular. It was smaller than a traditional dreadnought, but seemed to occupy more space than its dimensions suggested. Looking at it directly caused physical discomfort, as if the human visual system was not equipped to process its true form. "The ship you are looking at is the UTS Ragnarok," Chen explained. "Its crew volunteered for a one-way mission. They will not be returning home. They have nothing left to lose and no reason to show restraint. By the time you receive this transmission, they will have reached your outer territories." Vexithara felt something she had not experienced in her 3,000-year lifespan: fear. Not concern or worry or strategic anxiety, but pure, primal terror at the thought of that impossible ship, moving toward worlds she was sworn to protect. "This is your final warning," Chen continued. "Withdraw all forces from human space immediately. Return to your core worlds and forget that humanity exists. Any hegemony ship found in human territory after this transmission will be considered an act of war, and we will respond with absolute force." The transmission paused, and Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly. For a moment she looked almost human again rather than something wearing human shape. "I want you to understand something," she said quietly. "We do not want this war. We do not enjoy what we are about to do to you. But you left us no choice when you threatened our children. Every death that follows is on your hands, not ours. We are simply the instrument of consequences you set in motion." The image disappeared, leaving the council chamber in absolute silence. It was General Korthron who spoke first. "We cannot allow this threat to continue. The Omega protocols must be activated immediately." "And how do you propose we deploy them?" Archon Solaris demanded, his energy form flaring with agitation. "These humans appear to exist partially outside normal space-time. Our most destructive weapons may be useless against them." The Kalith collective pulsed rapidly as trillions of minds worked in parallel to process the threat. "Additional data required," it finally announced. "Recommend immediate deployment of observation vessels to monitor human activities. We must understand their capabilities before determining appropriate response." But before any orders could be given, new alerts began flashing throughout the chamber. Long-range sensors were detecting massive disturbances in space near the outer rim of hegemony territory. Reality itself appeared to be fluctuating, as if something enormous was moving through dimensions that normal matter could not access. "Report," Vexithara demanded. The sensor technician's crystalline form flickered with distress as she processed the incoming data. Multiple spatial anomalies detected in sectors 7 through 12. Gravitational distortions consistent with large-scale reality manipulation. No direct visual contact with source objects. On the tactical display, red markers began appearing at the edges of hegemony space. 7 distinct disturbances moving with purpose toward populated systems. The markers were labeled with the names Chen had provided: Ragnarok, Kaylee, Apocalypse, Nemesis, Entropy, Void, and Ending. "Time to intercept?" General Corthron asked. "Unknown," the technician replied. The objects appear to be moving through folded space. Traditional calculations do not apply. Vexthara watched the display as humanity's lethal vessels moved toward the civilization she had spent millennia protecting. Each marker represented not just a ship, but a manifestation of a species' absolute commitment to the destruction of its enemies. "Open a communication channel to all border systems," she ordered. "Full evacuation protocols. Move all civilian populations to core worlds immediately." "Counselor," General Corthron protested, "we cannot abandon entire sectors based on the threat of 7 ships." "These are not ships," Vexithara replied, her ancient voice heavy with the weight of terrible understanding. "They are nightmares given form by a species that has decided to become something other than civilized. And we are about to learn what happens when you threaten the children of monsters." The first reports came in 6 hours later. The UTS Ragnarok had reached the mining system of Kethmora. There had been no battle, no heroic last stand, no desperate calls for reinforcement. The system had simply stopped existing. 3 planets, 7 moons, 2 space stations, and 40,000 hegemony citizens had been edited out of reality as thoroughly as if they had never been born. The only thing left behind was a memorial beacon broadcasting a simple message. Here stood those who threatened Earth's children. 6 more systems would fall before the week was over. And that was only the beginning. The evacuation of the Outer Rim began at dawn on Vorthak Prime, a sight that had not been witnessed in the galaxy for over 8,000 years. Massive transport ships, their crystal hulls grown in the deepest caverns of ancient worlds, rose from planetary surfaces carrying millions of refugees. The orderly civilization that had ruled the galaxy for millennia was fleeing in terror from 7 human ships. High Counselor Vexithara stood in her private chamber, watching the evacuation feeds on a dozen floating displays. Each screen showed another world emptying itself, another system being abandoned to the advancing human vessels. The UTS Ragnarok had destroyed 3 more systems in the past 48 hours. The UTS Kali had begun systematically hunting down fleeing ships, leaving behind wreckage that screamed across all communication frequencies. A soft chime announced the arrival of General Corthron. The military commander's crystalline form had taken on a darker hue, stress fractures visible along his angular edges. "The 3rd Fleet has reached the Vega terminus," he reported. "Admiral Kelthos requests permission to engage the human vessel designated Apocalypse." Vexthara considered this. The Vega terminus was a major industrial hub, home to 40 billion Vorthak citizens. If it fell like the other systems, the economic damage alone would cripple the hegemony for generations. "What force does Admiral Kelthos command?" she asked. 80 ships of the line, including the dreadnought Eternal Vigilance, full planetary bombardment capability, and the newest reality stabilization technology. Reality stabilization technology. The hegemony's latest attempt to counter the humans' impossible weapons, devices that locked local space-time into fixed configurations, theoretically preventing the kind of dimensional manipulation the human ships employed. grant permission to engage, Vexithera decided, but only if civilian evacuation is complete. I will not sacrifice lives for a test of new technology. General Corthron bowed and departed, leaving Vexithara alone with her screens and her growing despair. In the 3 days since the human ultimatum, 12 systems had been completely destroyed, not conquered or occupied, but removed from existence so thoroughly that star charts had to be updated to reflect the empty space where they had once been. But the physical destruction was only part of the nightmare. The human ships were broadcasting something as they moved through hegemony space, a signal that drove any intelligence that received it into screaming madness. Entire planets had to be quarantined as their populations suffered psychological collapse from exposure to transmissions that seemed to carry the weight of humanity's accumulated rage. A priority communication alert interrupted her thoughts. The symbol indicated an emergency. Transmission from beyond hegemony space, the neutral zone where dozens of minor species maintained their own territories. Put it through, she ordered. The being that appeared on her screen was Altarian, one of the gaseous entities that inhabited the cloud nebulae beyond the galactic rim. Its form shifted constantly. Patterns of light and energy that conveyed emotion more clearly than any solid expression. High Counselor, the Altarian said, its voice carrying harmonics of pure terror. I bring word from the Neutral Council. Our long-range sensors have detected activities in human space that we felt you should know about. Activities. Vexthara felt her crystal matrix growing cold. Explain. The humans appear to be constructing something in their home system. Our observers report massive energy signatures and reality distortions that extend across several light years. The construction appears to be... The Altarian paused, its form flickering with distress. A weapon capable of destroying entire galactic regions. Vexthara absorbed this information in silence. A weapon capable of destroying galactic regions. Even the ancient Omega protocols could only sterilize solar systems. What the Altarian was describing was beyond anything in her civilization's experience. There is more, the Altarian continued. The humans have issued a general broadcast to all species in the galaxy. They are offering safe passage to any civilization that wishes to evacuate to the Andromeda Galaxy. They have provided technical specifications for long-range transport vessels and detailed navigation charts for the intergalactic void. They are encouraging galactic evacuation, Vexithera asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes. The message indicates that they consider this galaxy to be contaminated by the hegemony's presence. They intend to cleanse it completely. The communication ended, leaving Vexithera alone with the implications. Humanity was not simply fighting a war of conquest or revenge. They were preparing to sterilize an entire galaxy, rather than allow the hegemony to continue existing. Emergency alerts began flashing throughout her chamber. New reports were coming in from across hegemony space. The human ships had changed their pattern of attack. Instead of destroying systems sequentially, They were now striking at seemingly random targets across thousands of light years simultaneously. Vexithara studied the tactical displays, trying to understand the new strategy. Then the pattern became clear, and she felt her ancient heart grow cold with understanding. The humans were not attacking random targets. They were targeting every system that had voted in favor of the original ultimatum to humanity. Somehow they had accessed the hegemony's most classified records and identified every individual who had supported the decision to demand human surrender. They were systematically hunting down everyone who had threatened their children, but even that horror paled beside the next report. Long-range sensors had detected something new emerging from human space. A ship larger than anything ever constructed, its hull extending across dimensions that should not have been able to support physical matter. The vessel's energy signature was visible from 3 sectors away, a burning wound in space-time that hurt to observe directly. The ship's designation came through in Admiral Chen's calm voice. UTS Omega, Final Solution Protocol. As reports flooded in from across the galaxy, Vexithara began to understand the true scope of humanity's plan. This was not warfare as her species understood it. This was extinction applied with mathematical precision. The humans had decided that the hegemony represented an existential threat to their children, and they were implementing a final solution with the same methodical determination they might use to solve any other engineering problem. Her personal communicator chimed with an urgent message from the Zephyrian territories. Archon Solaris was requesting immediate consultation on a matter of extreme urgency. When the connection established, Solaris's energy form appeared more agitated than she had ever seen him. Vexithara, we have detected something that changes everything. Our deep space observatories have confirmed what the humans are building in their home system. And it is a stellar manipulation array. They are preparing to cause their own sun to go supernova. Vexithara felt her crystal matrix beginning to crack under the strain of processing this information. That makes no sense. They would be destroying their own homeworld. That is precisely the point, Solaris replied, his energy form flickering with barely controlled panic. They are willing to sacrifice Earth itself to ensure our complete destruction. The supernova will be channeled through artificial wormholes they are creating. They intend to use their own star as a weapon to sterilize every hegemony world simultaneously. The implications hit Vexithara like a physical blow. Humanity was prepared to commit species suicide to guarantee the hegemony's destruction. They valued their children's safety more than their own continued existence. How long? She asked. Our calculations suggest 6 standard months before Sol reaches critical instability. After that, Solaris's form dimmed with despair. After that, there will be nothing left of hegemony civilization except scattered refugees in distant galaxies. Vexithara closed the communication and sat in the darkness of her chamber, surrounded by displays showing the collapse of everything her people had built over 10 millennia. The humans had given them 6 months to evacuate an entire galaxy. But even as evacuation ships launched from every hegemony world, carrying billions of refugees toward uncertain futures in distant galaxies, Vexithara knew the truth. This was not really about the ultimatum anymore. This was about what humanity had become in response to the threat against their children. They had transformed themselves into something beyond civilization, beyond mercy, beyond any concept of proportional response. They had become the living embodiment of absolute consequence, the universe's answer to anyone foolish enough to threaten the innocent. In trying to treat humans as resources to be optimized, the hegemony had awakened something that could not be reasoned with, negotiated with, or defeated. They had created their own nemesis from a species that had simply wanted to be left alone to raise their children in peace. The irony was not lost on her. In their ancient wisdom and technological superiority, the elder races had forgotten the most basic truth about survival. Never threaten a parent's child unless you are prepared to face what that parent becomes when they have nothing left to lose. Admiral Chen's final broadcast reached every world in the galaxy that night. You have 6 months to leave, use them wisely. 5 years after the end of the Hegemony War, the galaxy was unrecognizable. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the TFS New Horizon, watching the sunrise over New Geneva, humanity's new capital world. The planet had been a lifeless rock when they found it, but now cities of crystal and steel stretched across, continents that had been terraformed with technologies taken from the ruins of hegemony worlds. Elena was part of the generation born during the evacuation from Earth. She had been 3 years old when Sol went supernova, taking humanity's homeworld with it in a blaze of light that had sterilized half the galaxy. Her earliest memories were of cramped transport ships and the faces of adults who spoke in whispers about the war that had cost them everything and given them dominion over the stars. Captain Vasquez to the bridge. Came the announcement over the ship's communication system. Priority transmission incoming. Elena made her way through corridors lined with memorial plaques bearing the names of Earth's cities, its mountains, its rivers, and its people. Humanity had lost their homeworld, but they had kept their memory. Every ship, every station, every new settlement carried pieces of the world they had sacrificed to ensure their children's survival. On the bridge, Communications Officer Martinez looked up from his console with an expression of barely contained excitement. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the Deep Space Monitoring Station at Sector 91. They've detected something from the edge of the galaxy. Elena settled into her command chair. Sector 91 was at the very rim of what had once been hegemony space, now patrolled by automated platforms that watched for signs of returning refugees or undiscovered elder race survivors. Put it through. The image that appeared on the main screen was familiar yet strange. It showed a crystalline vessel of Vorthak design, but smaller than their traditional ships and bearing modifications that suggested desperation rather than careful engineering. The ship was broadcasting on emergency frequencies, its message repeating in the simple diplomatic code that had become standard for refugee communications. This is the refugee vessel Crystal Hope, requesting sanctuary under the Terran Accords. We carry survivors from the Vorthak colony of New Sanctuary. We seek permission to approach human space. Elena studied the readings from their sensors. The ship carried approximately 200 beings, their life signs consistent with Vorthak physiology, but showing signs of malnutrition and stress. These were survivors of the evacuation, part of the scattered remnants of civilizations that had once ruled the galaxy. Communications. Open a channel, Elena ordered. When the connection established, the face that appeared on screen was clearly Vorthak, but unlike any Elena had encountered in the historical records. This being's crystalline features showed stress fractures that spoke of years of hardship, and its eyes held a wariness that came from surviving in a universe that had suddenly become hostile to its kind. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Terran Federation ship New Horizon," she said. "You are welcome in human space, Crystal Hope. Please transmit your refugee documentation and we will escort you to the nearest processing station." The relief that washed over the Vorthak captain's features was visible even across the species barrier. "Thank you, Captain. We were not certain we would be welcomed." "The war is over," Elena replied gently. "Humanity does not make war on refugees." As the Crystal Hope transmitted its documentation, Elena reviewed the standard refugee protocols that had been established in the years following the hegemony's collapse. The Terran Accords, drafted by the survivors of both sides, established clear rules for interaction between humanity and the scattered remnants of the elder races. The rules were simple. Refugees were welcome as long as they posed no threat to human civilians. Former military personnel could apply for asylum, but would be monitored for a period of adjustment. Most importantly, any being or organization that had participated in the original ultimatum to humanity was prohibited from entering human space under penalty of immediate execution. Documentation approved, Communications Officer Martinez reported. "The Crystal Hope carries agricultural specialists and their families. They've been living in the neutral zone for the past 3 years, trading with other refugee groups." Elena nodded. The neutral zone had become home to millions of elder race survivors who had fled during the evacuation. Some had found new homes in distant galaxies, but many remained in the empty space between the stars, afraid to venture too far from the only galaxy they had ever known. "Crystal Hope, you are cleared for escort to Processing Station Alpha. Welcome to the Terran Federation." As her ship changed course to escort the refugees, Elena reflected on how much had changed since the end of the war. Humanity had not simply conquered the galaxy, they had inherited it. The vast infrastructure left behind by the hegemony, the knowledge stored in their databases, the technologies developed over millennia of galactic rule, but they had also inherited the responsibility that came with power. The Terran Federation that had emerged from the ashes of Earth was unlike any galactic government that had come before. It was built on a simple principle. Never again would any species be forced to choose between surrender and extinction. The rules were enforced not through conquest or intimidation, but through the simple understanding that crossing humanity meant facing consequences that transcended death itself. "Captain," her tactical officer called out, "we're receiving another transmission. This one's from Admiral Chen." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Admiral Chen had become something of a legend in the years since the war's end. She commanded the Deep Space Monitoring Fleet from her flagship, the UTS Omega, patrolling the empty spaces where hegemony worlds had once existed. Most humans never saw her anymore, and those who did reported that the war had changed her in ways that went beyond physical scars. Put her through. The image that appeared was recognizably Admiral Chen, but Elena could see why her appearances had become so rare. The woman who had commanded humanity's transformation into something beyond civilization bore the weight of every decision she had made. Her eyes held depths that seemed to extend beyond normal space-time, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made reality itself seem fragile. "Captain Vasquez," Chen said, her voice carrying clearly across the vast distance between their ships. I wanted to personally welcome the refugees from Crystal Hope. They represent something important. Admiral? They are the children of our former enemies, born after the war ended. They have no part in the crimes of their ancestors, no responsibility for the ultimatum that started this conflict. They represent the possibility of redemption, the chance for their species to exist alongside humanity in peace. Elena studied the Admiral's face, trying to understand the weight behind her words. What are your orders regarding refugee policy? No orders, Captain. Only a reminder. We fought a war to protect the innocent. We must not forget that innocence exists on both sides of any conflict. These beings seek sanctuary not because they fear human retribution, but because they have nowhere else to go. We have the power to destroy or the power to preserve. Choose preservation whenever possible. The transmission ended, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts as they escorted the refugee ship toward human space. She understood now why Admiral Chen rarely appeared in public anymore. The woman who had led humanity's transformation into something capable of galactic genocide was also the guardian of mercy, ensuring that power was tempered with wisdom. The processing station Alpha appeared on their screens as they approached the border of human space. It was a massive facility built from the remains of an ancient hegemony shipyard, but modified to serve as a gateway for refugees seeking new lives under human protection. As the Crystal Hope docked at the station, Elena watched families emerge from the cramped refugee ship. Fourth Act children who had never known the crystal cities of their ancestors, only the harsh life of exile in deep space. Adults whose entire civilization had been reduced to scattered refugee fleets, searching for anyone willing to accept them. But she also saw hope. These beings would be given homes on human worlds, opportunities to rebuild their lives, and the chance to contribute to the civilization that had emerged from the galaxy's ashes. Their children would grow up as citizens of the Terran Federation, fully integrated into a society that valued diversity over conformity. A message arrived at her personal terminal, marked with the highest security classifications. It was a briefing document from Federation Command, updating all ship captains on the current state of galactic affairs. The report made for interesting reading. Refugee populations had been successfully integrated into human society across 200 worlds. Former hegemony technologies had been adapted for peaceful purposes, advancing human science by centuries. Trade relationships had been established with independent species in distant galaxies, creating a network of allies who remembered humanity's restraint and victory. But the most significant entry was at the end of the report. Long-range sensors had detected signs of new intelligent life emerging in the empty spaces left behind by the hegemony's evacuation. Species that had been suppressed or ignored by the elder races were beginning to develop their own civilizations, free to grow without the shadow of ancient empires controlling their development. Elena closed the report and returned to the observation deck, watching as the last of the refugees made their way into the processing station. Tomorrow these beings would begin new lives as citizens of a galaxy where no parent would ever be forced to choose between their children's lives and their species' survival. In the distance, barely visible against the star field, she could make out the running lights of other ships. Human vessels on patrol, maintaining the peace through presence rather than force. Refugee transports carrying survivors to new homes. Trade ships building connections between the scattered fragments of galactic civilization, and somewhere in the deep spaces between the stars, Admiral Chen continued her eternal patrol aboard the UTS Omega, ensuring that the universe remembered the price of threatening the innocent. The war that was intended to take human lives had indeed unleashed humanity's lethal vessels. But those same vessels now served as guardians of the peace they had won through sacrifice, ensuring that the galaxy would never again know the kind of war that had consumed the hegemony. Elena smiled as she watched the stars, thinking of the children being born on human worlds who would grow up in a galaxy where mercy was backed by the absolute certainty of consequences. It was not the peace their ancestors on Earth had dreamed of, but it was the peace their sacrifice had made possible. And in the end, that was enough.